Your Holiness, dear colleagues, I emphasize the importance of first part of my report, but really main part of my report is starts now. And first part was needed for me also for evaluation of concept of consciousness and emotion, which I will present to you. However, to introduce this concept very shortly, I need firstly introduce some, if you want, vocabulary, some terms which I will use, some ideas which I will use, which were basic for this formulation. The central point of synaptic plasticity concept, traditional concept, is that memory is stored in the brain by means of usage-dependent modification in strength of synaptic connections. And it's a most important, or maybe not most important, but very important part of cognitivism. A cognition approach is connectionism, which is based on this idea that connectionist model are large networks with simple, homogeneous, I want to stress it, parallel computing elements. And these weights of synapses usually regarded as encoding the system knowledge. It's, I cited here Smolensky. There are competitive ideas from my point of view, competitive, especially competitive if I speak about my great teacher, Vyacheslav Shvarkov, and also Gerald Edelman. They introduced selective principle underlying learning. Neurons are different, and learning means selection of units which are appropriate for this learning. And when they are selected, they change. And this change means their specialization. This specialization means that they start to subserve performance of this or that behavior. And from this position, formation of new act during learning is formation of new functional system. And new formed systems, they don't substitute the previously existed one, but superposed over them. And because of this, structure of memory is represented by systems of different age, which we form from the early beginning to the end of our life. Phenomenologically, if we see, we can see that during acquisition of new behaviors, firing rate impulses of some neurons increases during distinct behavioral acts. It means that these neurons become selectively specialized in relation to new learned act. And I want to show you briefly how this specialization of units looks like. And first, you will see specialization of neurons in mouse brain in relation to object which may be used for building a nest. If this animal contact with object which may be nest, neuron will be active. If it will be contact with another object which cannot be nest, even if they are very similar, we will have no activation. Activation will mean you will hear it as trrr. Each spike will be noise. And so if you have many noises, it means activation of neuron. And I will try to show if it works. Yes, it's activation in relation to object which may be nest. This object cannot be nest. Yes. And now I want to show you same kind of neurons, but not nest neurons, in human brain. And this neuron will be specialized in relation to individual memory, which relates to Simpsons movie. So it's we can call it, if we simplify, Simpsons movie neuron. This neuron will be active only during presentation of Simpsons movie, but not during another movie. And situation is the same. When you will hear G, it means activation, it means specialization in relation to this movie. Why? Sorry.
Welcome to Hollywood. Everybody comes to Hollywood, got a dream. What's your dream? I have a dream. Get out of here. Now, jump in, Mark. Trust me.
Flying.
I have a dream that one day.
Hey, Dad. Right outside.
Get out of here. Now, jump in, Mark. Trust me.
And I can say that if this subject will remember about Simpsons humor without presentation, this neuron will fire a little bit before he will give a report. Yes, I remember Simpsons. Before this, remember, we will hear this neuron. So this neuron is somehow indicate extraction from memory, this experience. And it's our data, because I need you to see what does it mean, this blue and red circles. Blue means old system, and this is example of old system in rabbit. Old system means that this neuron will be active during each right movement, no matter for which goal. For going to pedal to press to have a food, going to food to take this food, or if you're afraid him and he will run away to the right. It will also active in any behavior. And next is so-called new neuron. This neuron, its specialization was formed during learning of this instrumental act. And because of this, you can see here one neuron which is related to pulling the ring. Its activation, this black thing means activation. Activation during pulling the ring. And if you teach this rabbit to press pedal to have a put, you will have pedal activation. It means, by the way, that you will have such specialization in your brain, and this set of specialization will depend on, if you want, environment of cultural structure. To what you teach somebody, this kind of specialization you have in your brain. It means, by the way, I am sorry for returning to the first part, in different culture, you have different sets of specialization in your brain. It's not one and the same mechanism which works a little bit different in different cultures. No, you have different set. If you have no such social practice in this culture, you will have no such kind of specialization in this culture. I am sorry for this statement. And now I have used term system. What does it mean, system? I will give again definition, but a little bit another definition by Anokhin. And because it's very important for me to stress the following thing. System is the dynamic organization of activity of components in different anatomical localization, both in brain and in the rest of the body. It means the system connect brain and body. It's not brain systems. If you hear that some words about brain functional system, it means that it's not functional system theory. It's the same name, but by another people. Why it's very important, you will see very quickly, because it's important for solution of mind-body problem. Now I understand that to formulate this, I need a special lecture, but I will do it for 1 minute. So we consider psychological and physiological process as different aspects of the same informational systemic mechanisms. It means that there are mechanisms of realization of behavior, and we can describe them, let's say, from above, and then it's psychical description, or from down. Then it will be physiological or molecular biological description. And I want to say that this solution belongs to dual aspect principle. And it's only some of people who produce this solution. There are many of them, but I put here those whom I like more. From this principle, it follows that psychological and physiological description are partial description of the same systemic informational processes. It will be necessary for solution of problem of consciousness and emotion later. But I want to refer to your Holiness writing about Tibetan monks that laughed at Western researchers studying the dynamics of mind who allocated activity only in the head. I completely agree with this laugh. If you take into consideration that psychic description from above of functional system, this functional system includes not only brain but body. So it means that psychic is not only here. Psychic characterize its characteristic was whole body and brain activity together. Because of this, it's clear that if system both in the brain and in the body, so we have to relate it to not only to brain and body. For example, now we study activity of heart, electrical activity of heart, and we can see a very strong correlation of complexity of behavior and dynamics of complexity of behavior and cognitive load of behavior and so on with heart activity. We can even predict it from heart activity. And it's clear because heart is part of body. And now unified concept of consciousness and emotion. Existing disjunctive, you probably remember the title, non-disjunctive approach. Disjunctive approach, which is traditional approach to consciousness and emotion, can be described as following statements. There are heterogeneous cognitive and affective mental processes. These processes are ensued or subserved by different structures of brain and different neurons even. And being separate mechanisms, cognitive and affective processes can influence each other, conform with each other, and so on. We disagree with this concept of idea that consciousness and emotion are disjunctive psychological phenomena and that they have quite different physiological mechanisms. And now I will do maybe strange thing. I will go directly to relation between consciousness and emotion. My plan was, firstly, to speak about consciousness, about relation of stream of consciousness to behavioral continuum. But to shorten the time, I will omit this part and go directly to consciousness and emotion relation. Maybe it's strange, but if we take into consideration that consciousness, it's collection of millions of positions and sides of consideration. In any case, my consideration of consciousness is only one part of this consideration. I think that we can survive without it. Or, of course, I have definition of consciousness. And by the way, it's important. Some people, even very well-known people and very clever people, states it's not necessary to define consciousness because it's clear for everybody what consciousness is. I disagree with this position. And I disagree with this position because I said just a minute ago that we can consider consciousness from million sides and even from the position of different sciences. Because of this, you have to give definition of consciousness for what? To narrow your view, to show where you study consciousness, which kind of consciousness, which aspect of consciousness you study. It's impossible to scientifically study consciousness as a whole, because it's very many sides and aspects. So I omit. Contents, levels, only one thing. no evidence is only a statement. That I disagree that we have state of consciousness and absence of consciousness. We have indefinite range of different degrees of consciousness. And we can see this very many levels of consciousness in experiment even. So we can, of course, divide two big groups of consciousness. Consciousness during realization of behavior and during transition from one behavior to another, higher level of consciousness. But inside of each group, we have very many levels. And we can see them even during recording of the brain. Then to consciousness and emotion. First, orthogenetic principle. Wherever development occurs, it proceeds from a state of relative lack of differentiation to a state of increasing differentiation. What it means in our terms. Formation of new memory's functional system during development results in increasing differentiation of organism and environment relation. It means that we orient our behavior to less and less, to smaller and smaller details, if I simplify it. One example, when birds with closed eyes open their mouth to have a worm from mother's mouth, they open this mouth and take worm. Then their eyes are open. And they not simply open then their mouth, but they try to take this worm. They now can take into consideration position of mother and so on. It means development. It means taking into consideration details of environment. What does it mean in our terms? Number of alternative variants of behavior increases. So this growth of differentiation means that we have more and more possibilities to achieve even the same result as before. Next statement. Emotion can be recorded on a very early stage of development. So we can see some very prominent emotions on very early stage. So emotions are very early. Next. And consciousness relate to growth of differentiation. And systemic complexity and differentiation can be used even as a measure of consciousness experience. The more differentiation, the more complexity of relations between systems, the more consciousness we have. I refer to Tanini and Edelman's very famous work. Then two great domain of our experience. We have the withdrawal domain and approach domain. So we want to withdraw something and approach something. And this classification of approach and withdrawal domain from Schneerle and other, it's classification of these domains we can apply to all living beings. Because for all of them, we have something bad and something good, because they want to survive. It's their main goal. And if we consider then emotion, that we can connect this characteristic emotion to the most ancient and low differentiated level of this organization. And here I refer to very many people with whom I agree in this respect. They are cited here. And now this position of consciousness and emotion. Consciousness and emotion are characteristics that reside at different levels, but a unified systemic organization of behavior. What it means by simple words. It means that there is behavioral act, and this behavioral act consists of numerous systems, from less differentiated to maximally differentiation. They are active simultaneously. Each behavioral act, realization of all layers of our development, from ancient, very old, to most new. And we can characterize from the position of emotion, it's good or bad, like or dislike. We can characterize each level. But this characteristic is maximal for low differentiated system. Then, consciousness. We now in approach domain, let's say, we want it. But there are very many ways to achieve this I want. And when we characterize it from upper level, I want this, or that, it means to cognitive or conscious characteristics. So it means that we characterize with these two descriptions one and the same systemic entity. And there are very many consequences from this statement. Some of them, which I hope may be interested for you. First, we use term of continuity to this conscious and emotion. What does it mean? It means that there are no moments in development when consciousness suddenly appears or emotion suddenly disappears. Because I know even very clever people who said many years ago that we developed, and when we became very, very clever, emotions will disappear at all. When we were very cold cognitive. It's impossible. Because development means development from low differentiated level. And we will have emotions always. And now I want to stress that this position, from my point of view, which you can criticize, of course, maybe you see it deeper than me. I am sure that you see it deeper. That Dalai Lama challenge West's separation of emotion and cognition. I am too. I agree with this position. From my side, from my point of view, there is no this separation on different boxes, different mechanisms, and influence of cognition to emotion. Okay. And I even can agree with this statement that there is no concept of emotion as independent category. Of course, a dependent category. It's a description which is related to consciousness, and it's inseparable from this. Next very important statement. In any individual, it is possible to select system corresponding to the different levels of environment. What does it mean? It means that by definition, this division is valid for all organisms. It means that for all organisms that have development, if you tell me which organism do not have development, I will accept and we will agree with you. But still, I think that they are developed all. And all who developed have these different levels, and it means that they have more or less same processes as consciousness and emotion. Because of this, I agree with these people. Of course, I agree that it's impossible to deny that amoeba possess in some sense consciousness and so on. And I agree even with these people who think that we can describe emotion in very, very, very different living beings, even in algae, in plants really. And what I want to stress is that talking about the cultural specificity of this concept, which was even in my title of my report, I do not imply that its development had only been possible in the particular culture, and special for your Holiness. I don't mean that this concept can formulate only a guy from Russia. But it means that I emphasize that it corresponds to the prominent characteristic of systemicity and anti-reductionism in Russian science. And maybe that my culture favor me to produce it, but of course Koch or somebody else can produce some close ideas in another culture also. And here, part which I will not tell to you, it was only theoretical description. But we have numerous experimental description in the frame of this paradigm. And I thought that maybe very interesting is the connection which we can do between language, behavior, development, emotion, and sensory modalities. And we have experiments which show this, how all of them related. I cannot show you these experiments, but I cannot prohibit me to show at least 2 slides, if you allow me. This we omit, it's not my data. Yes, and position is that language is a specific tool for verbal reporting. And this tool helps individuals to coordinate their actions in order to achieve collective results. So it's specific tools for specific goal of communication. And so it's, by the way, for this, we need to speak about culture, for which we have no time. And proposition. It was proposition, I think, 15 years ago, that different senses and behavior, which based on these senses, formed during ontogeny on different stages. And if it's so, if differentiation grows during this division, we can propose that, yes, it's first proposition. Second, if we take words which related to this or that senses, we can propose that these words which relate to behavior, which formed on the early stage of ontogeny, will be more emotional than words which appear or which relate to behavior which appear later. And we have these experiments, many experiments, and we prove this proposition, and we have shown that it's so. I omit this beautiful data, and only conclusion, that we have intensity of emotion, and we have different sensory modalities, and we have different words which relate to these sensory modalities. And you see that the more, the later this behavior appear, the less emotional words which relate to this behavior. And words that relate to behavior which formed on the early stage of ontogeny are more emotional. So it's how we can use this united concept of consciousness and emotion for concrete experimental study. We have many of them. And now I will not read answers on all these questions because all answers are affirmative. Yes. That's all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Alexandrov. So we have some time for discussion. Your Holiness, do you have any questions or comments?
What is the definition of emotion?
No. So what's your definition?
Yes, it's a very complex question. Because to say about definition of emotion, I have to say about definition of consciousness. I am sorry. Yes. And then...
Emotion consciousness treasure. I think there are, two categories. One, emotion through reasoning, through conviction, some emotion. Another emotion, biological, such as sexual desire, biological. Then certain sort of emotion, not biologically come, but through training, reasoning, then you develop firm cause of conviction that then you should bring some emotion. So there are many different kind of emotion. So one time, because of the late Varela, our discussion, then finally, of course, according to Buddhism, Buddha's mind also there is some emotion. So emotion, not necessarily something negative, through sort of reasoning, through training of mind, some conviction, like that. And then, what is the definition of consciousness?
Yes. I want only to repeat that there are very many ways to describe consciousness. And please don't think that if I define consciousness, I mean that consciousness is that and that's all. It's so it's my way to see consciousness.
So can you say consciousness of human being, consciousness of insect?
Yes.
Both have consciousness.
Yes.
But big differences because of brain.
Big differences because of what I can say, my opinion.
소수 이지기도네. 전능어인에서 되면 말아.
Does that mean that it's not a reality then?
What?
When you say it's
according to observer's sort of feeling, view. So then 10 observer, 1,000 observer, different sort of different definition of consciousness.
no.
So maybe firstly I will say about definition of consciousness. From my point of view, with my angle of view, I again want to say that it may be different angles.
Yes.
And when I consider consciousness, I mean the content of consciousness. It's evaluation of result of my relation with the environment in terms of society. So it means that I did this and that, and I get this and that, and I evaluate this. And this evaluation means contents of consciousness. And this evaluation, there is no holes in this evaluation. We evaluate our relation with the environment always during realization and behavior and when we have a final result. And level of this evaluation is different during performance and during final result. But we always evaluate our behavior in terms of relation between what we want and what we get. So content of consciousness, with my point of view, with my description, it's constant evaluation of what I want and what I have, and how I should correct my behavior to really get what I want. This is content. And this content, our individual behavior always correlate or coordinate with society. Because of it, we evaluate our behavior and our individual result in terms of relation of this result to common goals of society. Even in individualistic society, we do it. It means that we evaluate result of any action, even if we are alone in the room, from the point of view of society and through the eyes of society. It's content of consciousness. Now, what I say...
Even if you are an ant,
and
you are a mosquito, and you have consciousness.
Yes,
so what then?
I am going to this position. But firstly, I will answer on the first question about emotion. And then to the position between animals and human beings. So, and when I speak about emotion, sorry, I think that it's evaluation of results of our behavior, but on another level. It's good or roughly bad. I don't like it. I like it, I want. And this raw evaluation in terms want, dislike, afraid, and so on, it's so-called emotional evaluation. It's my definition. Now about difference. All living beings achieve result. There are no reflex machine even in animal wisdom. If they achieve result, it means that they evaluate this result even in terms of their insect or animal society. But we use for our evaluation memory, and this memory in human being content I'm sorry for simplification, use so-called cultural memory. It means memory which were accumulated during development of humanity. So when we evaluate our results and we are humans, we evaluate our result through the eyes and with memory of humans, all human beings. And if we are animal, we evaluate our behavior in terms of our own memory, or in best case, as a memory of individuals with whom we are closely connected. This is difference.
Yes, probably one more question, if possible, from the Buddhist audience.
Thank you, Professor, for this wonderful presentation. And my question is, this morning you talked about this increase and decrease of empathetic response that comes in people when they watch other people from other racial groups. So would you say that, I wonder if you say that it's a basic human nature, or it's more like a cultural influence?
You see, I think that it is evolutionarily predetermined property, which we can correct. And there are such experiments, very interesting from my point of view and very serious. In the United States, they have very good program of tolerance. You remember that I criticized this idea of tolerance, but they have good program of tolerance, and people really feel that they should be tolerant to Afro-Americans, to other nations, and so on. And if you ask these people to feel that tolerance questionnaire, they answer nicely as tolerant people. And they're not lying because they're checking for lying. They are not lying, they say true. But if you show them black face and then white face, and then you will measure blinks on click, you will see that when you show black face, their blink will be larger. It means they're afraid. They have unconscious afraidness. As this thing, you see, all our relations in evolution based on in-group, out-group relations. And unfortunately, we and they, it's evolutionary thing, and in biology, there are special disciplines which study how we evaluate ours, that he is we. So in that sense, I think that first statement, that it's evolutionary predetermined. Second, we can do something with that. And yesterday, I even cited such work, if you remember, from Belgium or from Holland. They, during one experiment, they form empathy and support for people who belong to immigrant group in special experiment. And then, during many days, this man has this empathic feeling. So it's possible to influence this culture, but we should take into consideration that we have evolutionary history. It's my answer.
We are changing places with Professor Anokhin because next presentation is mine, and he will be
So I
writing.
will go from this. Thank you. Thank you for your question.
How do I find it?
I did something wrong. I don't touch him.
So, to save the time, I will not introduce Professor Chernigovskaya for the second time, but will just say that her interest is very broad. I introduced her in terms of neurolinguistics, but you might see from the name of the presentation that she goes broader even to quantum physics. And the things that you mentioned during the lunch about interactions, possible interactions of quantum physicists and neuroscientists, is her interest also.
Thank you so much. I'm light-minded. That's why I step on that dangerous field. However, I watched many hours of your Life and Mind Institute sessions. So I know what was already discussed. And so when I thought what to present, it was a puzzle what to do, because it's not a historical talk after all, but there are wonderful Russian thinkers. So I decided that I'll give you a mixture of different things, and I'll introduce some really wonderful figures for you to know that we didn't start science a year ago. And we have many interconnections, by the way, in three of our presentations, which is quite natural. We didn't know it, but it happened. So, first about cats that live in a quantum world, as all of us do, by the way. So we shouldn't be naive and think that quantum world is somewhere else. It's here, and it's even within us. So we are quantum figures, in a way. So, Schrödinger's cat, as you all know, I won't read it to save the time, but the problem was that the cat is simultaneously alive and dead, and it appears whether it is alive or dead only when you open the box. So to say it seriously, only when an observer comes to the scene. And I think this is an extremely important item, because classical science presumes that a scientist is a person sitting somewhere else, while the theater, which is a world, is on the screen. And he or she is sitting somewhere else. So he is not a participant, which is not true. When all that quantum adventure happened, they told us, don't worry, it's all happening only in a quantum world, where such small things live. We are in a different world, and it has nothing to do with us, which is not true. This caricature shows another cat, of whom we know only his smile. And that cat appeared to Alice when she entered a wonderland, if you remember. So there was a Cheshire cat, and the caricature shows the mixture of these cats. So that smile representing the whole cat is in the box. And we do not know what is there until we open it. Niels Bohr, as well as all his friends or enemies from the same company, stated that an observer is a part of scientific paradigm, which means, in our words already, that the data depend on our mind. The data depend on who is looking at them, who is watching them, who is making analysis of them. They are not neutral. The data are not theory-free, they are even not emotion-free. Einstein, whom I also love so much, wrote that there is a belief that an external world is independent of the perceiving subject, and it's the basis of all natural science. But the same person, I read recently, for some reason, don't know why, I read many of his letters and his notes. Just for some reason got interested, and got a lot. And the same person writes, body and soul are not two different things, but only two different ways of perceiving the same thing, which is very strange from a physicist point of view. And that strict physicist, you do not expect it. So physics and psychology, it's approaching to physics, to that parallelism of psychophysics. Physics and psychology are only different attempts to link our experience together by the way of systemic thought. Systemic thought is where? It is not in the world. It's in our head. By the way, my question to all the speakers was, I understand that I won't get an answer, which is, what is the difference between consciousness and mind? I suppose that who knows this answer are the Buddhist monks. But science doesn't, because these are linguistic tricks, nothing more. No one can give a good formula of what is consciousness or mind. It's a secret, yes. So those who were with you, Your Holiness, here, posed some questions. Some of the questions are mine. Anton Zeilinger exclaimed once, "Why is the world so strange?" It's a romantic exclamation, because from a scientist you never get such exclamations. But still, because why is that macro world so stable? It has stones, it has tables, it has glasses, and in that micro world we even do not know what it has, because it simultaneously it's either here or there or nowhere, or here and there simultaneously, which you cannot grasp because it's impossible for our reasoning. As I already said, the observers are also quantum phenomena. All of us know that we have constraints of different kinds. Firstly, of sensory constraints, because we have this range for hearing, this range for seeing, this range for touching, etc. But we also have constraints here, and we'll come back to that. And my favorite philosopher, who is Immanuel Kant, evidently told it to everybody. Higher brains that we have watch their own processing. This is a crucial point because it's a metacognitive functioning. So it's functioning about functioning. Not all these processes, you could get them. For instance, mental grammar and all the linguistic processing that I'll come up to later are impenetrable. You do not know how it's being done. And then starts the whole tragedy. Is there a place for the self in the brain? Do we need this information? Do we need that place? I think that irritates me so much for a number of months, I would say, even not years. Why do you need these addresses? Why do I need to know where the folk is here, where the glass is here? Why? Does it give me relevant and important information? No, it doesn't. Because addressing to your presentation, it's just a correlation. Correlation is not causation. We need causation. We want causation. We do not need these addresses for glasses and pencils. So classical science is a so-called third-person science, as I've said already. We are as if spectators. There is a paradox that was wonderfully formulated by one of my wonderful colleagues and a colleague and friend of David Dubrovsky, Professor Lektorsky. He wrote in one of his books, the brain is in the world. However, the world is in the brain. What shall we do with it? It's a paradox, because there is no start, no end. The third and third person experience are staying a huge problem. What about qualia? If to talk about for instance, artificial intelligence or the so-called other minds, can qualia be transferred to them? What's the material or any basis for that? The first person experience can be transferred anywhere, in any form. And of course, that Professor Alexandrov has said, of course, embodied cognition. There is body. We are as we are because we have such a body. If we meet such creatures which live on the same planet, but in the ocean, what's the way to communicate with them? I think they are impenetrable, absolutely impenetrable. There is no way to catch any way to give or get information for them. Of course, you can get physical information, some sound that they produce in the water, but it's not relevant. And now I'm introducing some Russian names. An astonishing Russian physiologist, Alexei Uhtomsky, he wrote very long ago. I'm sure he knew nothing about quantum physics. He writes, there is no object without a subject, and there is no subject without an object. And the later phrase is close to what you announce. We are not the viewers, we are the participants of being. Moreover, he says, our behavior is work, our nature is being made. So we are not born as a final something, whether it's good or bad. We have to be built, and to be built, to be constructed, to be formed by ourselves. It's amazing that these words are written by a physiologist and so early. Two Russian philosophers, Mamardashvili and Pyatigorski, in different works which were both written together and separately, they announce what you see, mind and being form a continuum. Thinking and being, they say, coincide, not less. Mamardashvili also wrote a lot of things about anthropic principle. And, well, let's proceed. You can read it. Vasily Rozanov, one of Russian very famous philosophers, he says, and he was very much depressed with it. He says, I came to this world to see, not to do or commit, opposite to what I announced already. Always to be an observer, not a participant, he writes. This is where such a suffering comes from. So all these philosophers, they were extremely highly intellectual, but they were emotional as all, plus to it. And probably this adds the value to what they were writing. Berdyaev, which was already shown by Yuri, he says being is revealed via a subject and not via an object. Again, the same thought. Being opens itself in humans and via humans. So whether there is any being without us or not, we do not know. It's about that, the first cat. We do not know. If we are there, there is being. If we are not there, we do not know what's going on. Man is a microcosmos and a microtheos. Vladimir Zinchenko, who is much younger, he also announced it quite often, the external world is being built from inside. External world is being built from inside. Mind and consciousness, can we catch it? Can we register it? I wonder, I would be happy if anyone would tell me, we registered it, we measured it, we caught it. It's the mind, but nobody ever did it. Because it appeared that it was memory, or attention, or physical sensation, or anything else. Yuri Lotman, a wonderful Russian and living in Estonia, a wonderful scholar, wrote humans are the only having the ability of reflection. Here comes an important thing. I think that when you talk about consciousness, it's about reflection to a certain degree. Reflectivity, I mean. And self-reflection, which is even more important. We have that meta activity that gives us the possibility to self-reflect. Well, let's drop it. Roger Penrose, who is not a Russian personality, but he was visiting St. Petersburg and Moscow several years ago, and he was giving a talk at my cognitive seminar, which was wonderful. And it appeared then that his grandmother came from Russia, which I never could suppose. We even found the house where they lived, and that house is now a consulate of the United States of America, by the way. So Roger Penrose, who is a physicist and a cosmologist, he was involved in that problem of consciousness years ago, and you see what he wrote. So the main idea of him is that Turing machine and algorithms doesn't help, because consciousness is not algorithmic. Some parts of it are, but it doesn't cover the whole space. So his idea is that consciousness or mind, I do not know which word to choose, is on the quantum level. Of course, you should prove it, which is not an easy thing, and no one did it. Gerald Edelman, a Nobel Prize winner, who was already mentioned here, produced a very important idea that no two people are wired the same way, because there are different possibilities, and structures form groups which tend to fire together, and these groups are the basic operations, the basic units, it's better to say, in the brain. So up to him, it's a huge net composed of different things, but more relevant for our talk is it's about concepts. And how can you find concepts in neurons or in glia? You can probably find it, but it will be again a correlational thing. You cannot catch a concept from the net. But still, these are concepts of maps, concepts of maps of maps of maps of maps, and it's Konstantin's field. Of course, it's not a computer in the sense that we know about it. It's a good metaphor, but nothing more than a metaphor. If it's a computer, then definitely it's at least two types of computers. One is algorithmic, and we more or less know how they function, and we build supercomputers, and everything is okay. But the other one is the one that lives with metaphors, with analogies, with qualia, with uncomputable things, not structured things. It's an absolutely different way. Kant, in many of his works, pronounces, especially in these two, he announces an awful thing. He says, we do not retrieve the laws of nature from nature. We prescribe the laws to nature because we have such brains. He never spoke of brains, but we now understand that this idea happened. It all started long ago. For an example, I mention the so-called Molyneux problem, and it's 1692, which was then explored by Locke. And it's the discussion between empiricists and renationalists. I won't read it for the sake of time. So the debate continues, and it will never end, I suppose. And now we can add that there are cross-sensory connections that are developed in the brain. It's a step to the decision of that problem. Of course, this is not inborn. This is what is being built by environment and other things. Then, as for communication, to communicate, we need to have something stable. We need to know that table is a table, and not today it's a table, in 5 minutes it's a glass, and then it's a horse. In this way, there is no communication which is relevant. But the world is not stable. We make it stable using words. So we have a special tool for that. And let's come to Russian physiologists. Some of the portraits were already shown. This is Sechenov and Pavlov. They are the classics. I love Sechenov much more than Pavlov, which is my own business, of course. But there are another picture where it's Leon Orbeli, the founder of evolutionary physiology, and who was the disciple of Pavlov. And they had very strict discussions. For instance, Pavlov, who is not a romantic figure, by the way, in 1914, he wrote that he totally excludes even a hint of mentioning subjective states in his studies of brain activity. So, only reflexes. I push you and you fall, and I measure your brain activity. What's the use of it? So, Leon Orbeli was the opposite. He insisted that you should deal with these very complex and very dubious and very dangerous things. So, again, I have no time to comment, but we face the monism of Pavlov and the dualism of Sherrington, for instance. And then we move to other people. Two of them were already shown. One is the grandfather of the Professor Anokhin. The other is a teacher of Professor Alexandrov. And Hebb is a British neurologist that explored approximately the same paradigm, approximately. But as far as I know, Professor Anokhin described these effects earlier than Donald Hebb. Is it so? But Donald Hebb simply didn't know, he was not polite, he simply didn't know about it. Alexei Leontiev, a wonderful Russian psychologist, he wrote his idea was psychology of activity and not reactivity. Again, the same thing. Not reaction, but action. So, personal attitude and personal position. Vladimir Bekhterev, who also was shown here and who was in contradictive attitudes with Pavlov. They were almost enemies, in a way. Just for your interest, in 1888, he gave an assembly talk in Kazan with that topic, where he developed the concept of unconscious 3 years before Sigmund Freud. It's about missing information. And nobody knew it for decades. Sechenov wrote a fantastic thing, which I came across by chance. A book fell on me from the shelf. And I opened at a necessary page. And there I read, from a procedural perspective, there is not the slightest difference between a real event and its consequences. Just think of it. And the recollection about it. How could that be? He couldn't know about it. Now we know that if we put a person in a tomographer, in fMRI, and he or she has hallucinations, we'd see a picture that will show us that he is really hearing and processing acoustic or visual information. But Sechenov, which was 150 years ago, he could not have a hint of it. How did he got that idea? So, language. Chomsky, whom I'm delighted with his fantastic mind. However, I'm from a different party. But he announces that language is bad for communication. Language is not a good tool for communication because it is ambiguous. You never know what is being pronounced, even if you have your own words, but I'll comment it later. Language is a tool for thinking, is a tool for mentality. This is what he says. And some citations on that topic. Umberto Eco, who left us not so long ago, he says that self-revelation of being is actuated within language. Language has an enormous effect on our being. And not in a trivial aspect, that those who speak Finnish are different, have different, slightly different mentality from those who speak Russian or Hindi or whatever. This is evident, but I'm not talking about this. Language itself forms ourselves. Mamardashvili said, mind is a paradox you cannot get accustomed to. It's very wise. You cannot get accustomed to the fact that there is mind. Inevitability of thinking, he says. Man is doomed to think. It's the ontological feature of humans. Humans are those who think. I'm not hinting on the fact that nobody else thinks. I simply do not know. But what is evident that we cannot not think. It's impossible. And he also writes, we are suspended in language. We are suspended in language, not because we are communicating, but because we are thinking in that paradigm. Gustav Speth, whom I suppose almost nobody knows outside of Russia, he writes, words are no sweating clothes of the thought, but it's flesh. The thought is born in the word and together with the word. Moreover, the thought is conceived in the word, which means that it's not a neutral thing. One should be very cautious using words. They are aggressive. They are not in a metaphorical sense. It is important how you formulate your thought. It's not neutral at all. Mikhail Bakhtin, a text begins to live as a result of interaction of two minds. If I had time, I could comment it because it was concerning your question during the lunch. It concerns the idea of bihemispheric brain. However, I simply have no time to comment it. But still, the main thought that was so fashionable then and continued to be fashionable up to recent times is the idea of a dialogue within a society, within two personalities, and within the brain. Because when they think, we have at least two contradictory versions or logics. Pavel Florensky, who was a religious personality and plus to it a great thinker and an engineer, by the way, according to his training, he wrote, the word is the reality itself. So important. The word is the reality itself. It is both the cognizing subject and the cognizable object, the word. So human cognition came after anatomy or not? It is a question. It's a chicken and egg thing. What came first? Have no time to read it, but just want again to introduce some figures. It's Professor Victor Bunak, who is considered to be a founder of Russian anthropology, and he's a great-grandfather of my son. He's not my blood, but a relative in a way. He was a professor of Moscow State University, and he wrote many wonderful classic papers. One of the last of them is, the last but not the least, Genus Homo, Its Origins and Development. And so I should speed up, of course. So then I'll miss everything that is connected with genetics. And, but still say some words about languages. All the languages of the world, in spite of huge differences between them, we still have approximately from 6,000 to 7,000 of languages on the planet, depending of how you count. So all of them, in spite of the fact that they're so different, have mutual specific features. They have phonology, they have recursion and syntax, and they have so-called universal features, probably innate. At least the school of Chomsky and other structuralists, they say they have these innate features, have genetic basis, so they are inborn. Inborn are not language facilities peculiar to specific languages. This is nonsense. But there are some very main basic things which are relevant for everybody. It's a very, very complex code, which is still more horrible, is that it's ambiguous, it's changing all the time. You have to proceed online, very quick analysis of all the levels of language, of phonology, morphology, syntax, to say nothing of pragmatics or semantics, which is an absolute horror. Now, let's, does languages evolve? They change from century to century, even from year to year. There are laws. And linguistics, some part of linguistics, for instance, in the European studies, most developed among this strata of linguistics, they know these laws. They know how it happened. And they can wind it backwards to see how the first, presumably the first languages or the first language facility used, what sounds they produced, etc., etc. So now there is a field which is called biolinguistics. You may call it whatever you wish, which tries to find universal features of evolution of biological systems and languages. And you can see the red terms below the slide. We even use the same words as are being used for biology, which is pedomorphism, neoteny, recapitulation, hybridization, mono and polygenesis, etc. It's an interesting and very well developed thing. Some principles are being formulated. For instance, Givon, a very outstanding linguist, outlined several of these principles. One famous Russian physiologist and biochemist, academician Natochin, and myself wrote several papers. One of them is From Archebiosis to Evolution of Organisms and Informational Systems, where we're making attempts, it's a huge paper, to insert the same principles, not to insert, I hope, not to insert, but to reveal principles that are relevant for all these systems. So, a dialogue again, Lev Vygotsky said that a dialogue is not only within the society members, but within your brain. Luria spoke of what Professor Alexandrov was talking, and which is heterogeneity of thinking in historical and developmental perspective. Thinking is not only Aristoteles. Thinking is different. We were taught to think like Aristotle or Descartes. We taught, full stop, and a pause. Vladimir Bibler, a philosopher, the process of the inner dialogue is a clash of radically different modes of thinking. A clash. I think every one of us sees it every day. And again, Lotman speaks of parallels between bihemispheric brain and culture. And he says that at least a bipolarity, to say nothing of multipolarity, is a necessary minimum for intellectual achievement in any sense of the word achievement. And now, what about mathematics? Mathematics is something objective, or it's a brain language, because Galileo wrote that God, or the Creator, wrote the book of nature by mathematics, so to study it, we should know what mathematics is. But mathematics consists of synthetic a priori knowledge, where that a priori comes from. It's very important, because if we be so happy to understand the origins of mathematics, we might probably have the basis of all knowledge, which is not derived from experience. Because what you get from experience, it's not easy, but to some extent you can understand it. But what about a priori knowledge, where it came from? Boris Rauschenbach, a famous academician, a mathematician, and even a person who developed fuel for rockets going to the space. He was, in the end of last years of his life, very much attacked by these ideas. So he says mathematics proves that it is impossible to describe equally a complete picture of the world. A mathematician says the true picture is what we have in the brain. What we have in the brain is a real picture. And again, I come to the beginning. The world is in the brain, but the brain is in the world. What shall we do? What about time? I'll try to quicken. What about time? Time is a dimension. Time is a physical event. Or time is a brain function. Does it still flow as a river in one direction, the same speed, no gaps? Is it really so? No, it is not. Because we have a lot of things that prove the opposite. Chemicals can change it. Your depression or maniac state can change it, etc., etc. So where is it? Is it in the brain? And they didn't start 5 years ago. St. Augustine wrote about it quite a lot. And he even wrote that we probably are always living in the presence. And here I want to remember one of my favorite books again. That's Alice, Wandering in the Wonderland, or across the mirror. You probably remember that a queen tells her, a gem is always for tomorrow. And this tomorrow never happens, because tomorrow is already today. So, and Alice is embarrassed. She says, but where is the gem? She said, I told you the truth. The gem goes for tomorrow. Languages are very exquisitely attentive to time. Of course, we have no time to explore it, but there are different ways of structuring the time in different languages. Some of the things are on the screen. There are not past tense. There are huge amounts of past tenses, depending on what part in the past you take. And I'm coming to the end. And I want to name one more person. And in a way, he's connected with India. Nikolai Kozyrev was a famous astronomer and experimental physicist. He discovered lunar volcanism and the atmosphere of Mercury, etc., etc. But then he was attacked by the idea of what is time. And he introduced the causal or asymmetrical mechanics, which takes the physical properties of time into account. He wrote several papers on it. Of course, he was aggressively met by astronomers and cosmologists, which doesn't show us everything. It's not the end. Time will show. Two of the papers appeared in English translation, not far away. And his idea is that luminosity of stars is unexplained within the framework of today's thermodynamics. So to be very primitive, he never said it, but it's myself. What the stars are fed by is time. So his idea was that time can be explored as a physical event, which he did. So here are his papers, and he cited this wonderful Nobel Prize winner that comes from India, who also had an opposition from the main scientific community. And here is his portrait. He also developed a very strange limit that was named after him, which was opposed by traditional physics. So their fate is in a way similar. And here we see Penrose that watches what's written about that limit. I'm finishing really. It's about arts and metaphoric thinking. Ludwig Wittgenstein, who in no way is Russian, but he influenced a whole set of humanitarian domains from the humanities, and Russians, of course. And reformulating Kant and others, I will ask certain intriguing questions. Imagine that the humans are removed from this planet. Imagine that we continue the way we act now, and there is nobody anymore. Only Trump exists, nobody else. Where would there be music or mathematics? And I'm not asking about the papers on which you get formulas or musical texts. No. Will there be mathematics and music if there is no listener and no thinker? My answer, no. There will be nothing. Wittgenstein introduced a very wonderful metaphor talking about texts, so about linguistics that describes text. It's a metaphor of a carpet. Every reader draws out his own thread of it. Fundamental observer dependence. So if I have a book of Shakespeare's dramas here, and if there is no reader, this book is a physical object and not a book of dramas. If there is Mozart, which is in the space, and there are no ears, and to be strict, no brains, because it's not the ear, no brains to perceive it. It's just a sound. These are just waves, nothing more. It's not music. So the crucial part of the observer, of the actor, because we are the actors, we are participants of the being, as Uchtomsky said, is absolutely crucial. And I end with one more Nobel Prize winner, which comes from Russia. I even happened to know him briefly. It's Joseph Brodsky. He is not only a wonderful neoclassical poet, a fantastic poet, but he is also a thinker. And look what he writes. Poetry is not a format form of entertainment. And in a certain sense, not even a form of art, but our anthropological genetic goal, our linguistic evolutionary beacon. It is also a highly, this is very important, it is also a highly economical form of mental acceleration. As a tool of cognition, poetry beats any existing forms of analysis, which shows us that Descartes and Aristotle are not the only participants, to say the least. In other words, what a poem, or more accurately, the language itself, tells you is be like me. And about the evolution. What is the purpose of evolution? If it's survival, neither of the fittest nor of the defeatist, that gives us some things to mentalize around. Were it the survival of the fittest, we would have to settle for Arnold Schwarzenegger and similar figures. If the latter, then we face Woody Allen's. The problem of evolution is much more deep than we used to observe it. And the last slide is like here. It tells you that your soul has got a long way to go. For at the moment of reading, you become what you read. You become the state of the language, which is a poem, and its epiphany or its revelation is yours. They are still yours once you shut the book, since you can't revert to not having had them. They're already there. That's what evolution is all about. It's not about Schwarzenegger's or Woody Allen's. It's about creating yourself as a personality. And I thank you for the patience. These are the flowers that are frozen in the ice. And I think they give us some hope, because the ice will melt. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Now I'm leaving. Yes. Thank you. Very interesting.
So what you have explained basically is about an interdependent nature of things.
Yes, yes, my
There is something. There is something. Because of that, the kasure, the tishaso, kaso porque yulene yu.
So you, in your presentation, you also came up with this the idea about there being an observed object as long as there is an observer, and observer and observed objects are mutually dependent.
And
if you have to delve deeper into the nature of things, then you would have to come up with this, the phrases which are found in the Heart Sutra: no eye, no ear, no nose, and so forth.
Yes, I was hinting on that. I'm not a specialist in Buddhism, of course, no way. But I read some things, so yes.
And in your presentation also, you made it very clear, you clearly came up with this idea of things being merely designated.
Yes.
I think you mentioned such a one Russian. So I may repeat one Indian.
There was one Indian, at least one.
I think over 3,000 years, this subject, I think, deeply investigate. So it's a different explanation. I wanted to share with you the Wolf Singer, the German.
Yes, I know.
Say once our meeting, he draw one, so because of the me level.
He drew a picture of human brain.
Rat and human brain.
Then he mentioned there is no central authority, the place of central authority. All sort of brain interconnected. So work because of the
network.
So he mentioned the Buddhist concept, no soul. That's very fit. No central authority. He mentioned like that. So thank you. I very much appreciate. Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Now, my daily routine, around 6 o'clock, sleep. Then next, 3 o'clock, or at least 3:30, wake up, some meditation. So therefore, now, time for rest. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night. See you again tomorrow.